Speak Plainly podcast, where we speak plainly about things that matter. I am your host, Owl Medicine, and welcome to 2023. We made it another year, y'all. So, since it's 2023, I wanted to talk about what my personal New Year's goal is. I guess goals. There's really one big goal, and then the other goal is to not have as many goals. So, my goal this year is based around, I'm calling it compassionate accountability, because I have been really good at like one or the other. I think when I was a small child, I was told that I was extremely compassionate, just super open-hearted and tender-hearted and very sensitive. And then I wasn't because life got to me, right? And then I became obsessed with accountability. I had my own issues from trauma and whatnot that caused me to act and respond in powerful ways that sometimes got me in trouble. And joining the military at 18 years old really put accountability like dead center in my life. And I love that I have both compassion and accountability, and that I'm very good at both. But the tail end of this year, there has been a couple of instances where I could have done better. And the way I could have done better would be to be compassionate and help hold people accountable when they're asking for it, of course, at the same time. Because one of the things that I have done that's caused some problems is I'm really good at being compassionate, followed by accountability. And I think I move from one space to the other much faster than most people. I move from compassion to accountability at the drop of a hat. Super easy for me. And I don't think it's as easy for most other people. So when they're coming to me, when we're just talking, I wind up in either a compassionate space or an accountability space. I wind up in a compassion mindset or a accountability mindset. And what I'm finding anyways, it seems to me it would do better to have both of them in the same space at the same time. Because it's easy for me to get wrong when someone needs compassion versus when someone needs accountability. Especially because when a person is expecting compassion, when it seems like they're attention seeking or something like that, I automatically move into accountability. And part of that's my medical training, because you get that in the medical world. You get attention seekers and drug seekers, and you have to just be like, no. And in my own life, for myself, I have to do the same thing. I have to hold myself accountable. I have to tell myself no when I really want to be compassionate with myself. Sometimes I'm not sure whether I'm being compassionate, like to my plight, whatever that may be, or if I'm just being lazy or something. Lazy is the wrong word. Maybe depressed is a better word. I don't know. When I'm hypo-functioning, if I allow myself to hypo-function very long, it's really easy for me to get into a funk. And then it's really hard to dig myself out of that funk. So I prefer just to avoid the funk entirely. And that's where the accountability comes in. So I'm good at this in my life, and I'm fine with, for me, with compassion followed by accountability in series. But to be able to bring them together is really tough. Part of the reason it's really tough is because I've never seen this really modeled. It's a goal that I have, but I've never really seen it modeled in my life. My family is the same way as far as... My family is much the same way as far as you're either in a compassionate space or most likely 80% of the time you're in accountability space. And with my background in the military, like I said, the accountability I got really good at, especially in the Honor Guard. My first 4 years in the Air Force, I was in the United States Air Force Honor Guard, and our job was to be perfect. Literally, we were the ceremonial guardsmen. Anytime that you saw people on television, saw people in military uniforms holding flags or rifles, standing next to the president, that was me. That was our job. And when you have that kind of job, you have to be perfect because you're always being photographed and videotaped, and you don't want to be that guy on the cover of some magazine or in the newspaper or on television scratching your nose, or the one person with their eyes closed, or the one person who missed a spot shaving. It looks terrible. It makes you look bad. It makes the Honor Guard look bad. It makes the entire military look bad. So, accountability. Accountability, accountability, accountability. I got written up one time for having dry skin on my face. I'm not kidding. I used to have to shave twice a day, depending on the funeral or whatever was happening that day. If I had a big job in the afternoon, I would have to shave, like a big job that we knew was going to be televised. I would have to shave in the morning and again after lunch, just because my skin was pale because we wore big hats and I have dark hair. So my beard was dark. That's how deep the accountability goes. And that's all good and fine. What really fostered my compassion was acupuncture. Getting into acupuncture and then going to acupuncture school, meeting those people there, hearing about the philosophy, living the philosophy. You have to be incredibly compassionate. If you can't bring yourself to understand that anything that anyone on the face of the planet has done, you would also do, you're not going to be a good acupuncturist. Not in my book. At least not as good as you could be. That was told to me, like that philosophy was told to me by a teacher of 5-element acupuncture, which is a form of acupuncture that's really focused on psycho-emotional presentations and dealing with all of our problems, both physiological, emotional, and a very energetic and psycho-spiritual bent to it. And it's marvelous and it's extremely powerful. But when he told me that, it really wow. Because he said, if you were born to different parents, if you had experienced what they experienced, you might beat your own kid. You might kill someone. You might rape someone. If those things had happened to you, and you can't in your heart find compassion for your patient, no matter what it is that they've done, you won't be able to help them. So in a way, a limit for me as a healer and a clinician is my compassion. One of the things that is a hard stop is my compassion. Once I choose or feel or believe that something is not worthy of compassion, I can no longer help it. And that's frustrating because compassion doesn't fix things. It makes us feel better, but it doesn't fix behaviors. And making us feel better is a big part of fixing something, but it's only a part. It's necessary, but insufficient. So it seems to me in my life now, after being hardened in the military and then softening up through acupuncture school and then doing my world traveling and running clinics and doing all the things that I do, I've had to swing over more toward accountability for myself, and it's something that is natural in me, and I'm very happy, because accountability for myself and for others is also boundaries. Holding other people accountable for when they cross my boundaries and being like, you crossed a boundary, I'm not dealing with this, bye-bye. Or, I'm not dealing with this, we're going to have a conversation. That's accountability. And that is necessary. So there's compassion and there's accountability. The accountability in me, I'm really good at both, but the accountability in me comes highly from my family of origin and my experiences in the military, burying people for a living, and then being in medicine, in Western medicine. And then the compassion didn't enter at all until after I was homeless and joined acupuncture school. And there I developed my compassion again, which didn't take nearly as long, I think, as developing a hardcore, accountability, because the compassion is innate, I think, in me as a sensitive person, but in all humans. Compassion and empathy are the hallmark of the human species, according to Darwin, which makes sense because we're the most social species in the world. So compassion and empathy are functional for such highly social creatures. But there's a problem with one or the other. And it's not a big problem, but it is one that I want to do better. I want to be better. And so I'm looking to try to bring these two kind of polar opposites towards each other. I want to integrate them. I want to hold both simultaneously and balance them. Because what I've noticed is I do one or the other. I do compassion and then I do accountability. And if I'm not mindful enough of the situation, I will try to hold people accountable when they need compassion. I don't think I'm compassionate when people need accountability. I just don't think that that's me anymore. But I definitely try to hold people accountable when they need compassion or they don't need to be held accountable. So I think by focusing this year on bringing the two together, I can solve some of my own frustrations with myself. There's been a series of stresses in my relationships, and I've told you guys about it. There's always stress in relationships. I'm not alone in this, I'm sure. But there's been some stresses in the relationships where things I could have done better. And what's really cool is I know that I'm on my way to integrating these two things because my turnaround is faster. And what I mean by that is when I do over accountability myself or someone else and I get really hard, because that's in a big way, in an umbrella, abstract kind of big way. That's what we're talking about is softness and hardness. Accountability is hardened. We have to sturdy ourselves. We have to brace ourselves. And compassion we have to soften into. And so I'm working on moving from hard to soft faster. And I'm doing a pretty good job, I think. So there's been a couple of instances that each time it went from a couple of weeks to a couple of days to a single night to yesterday. My neighbor came over and knocked on my door. I have a giant old van, and it's from 1990. So it's old, and it takes a minute for it to warm up. And my neighbor came over to complain about the smog getting into his apartment, the exhaust getting into his apartment. And this is a conversation that we've had before. And I try to do my best to not, I don't let it run too long, but I have to let it warm up or it literally doesn't go into gear. having had this conversation before, I have been mindful of this, and I have tried to not let it warm up too long and drive out a little bit early. And doing that has caused me to injure my transmission. So now I have to pay $3,000 for a new transmission. And when this guy came over and was kind of aggressive about it, I was just done. I was absolutely done. I instantly hardened, and I tried to be nice at first, and it wound up just turning into an argument, and he told me I was killing babies with my exhaust. And I was just like, whatever, bro, and walked back inside. And then I grabbed what I needed and went to the store. And I was really upset about this. And what I realized is I wasn't upset at him. I wasn't upset at him being a dick or about the situation even. What I was upset about is that I was a dick. Other people are allowed to be a dick. Like, you don't get to be a dick to me for free. But in my world, other people can do that. I can too. I mean, I did. I was a dick, and that's fine. But I can make it better. I can fix it. And so that's what I decided to do. The moment I decided that I was going to go to my neighbor's door, knock on his door, and apologize for being a dick, that I felt better. I instantly felt much, much better. And I didn't want to do it, but I did it anyway. As soon as I got home, it had been about 2 hours since our little scuffle, and when I went and knocked on his door and I just said, hey, man, I want to apologize for being such a dick earlier. And he came out, he stepped out and shook my hand and was like, I really appreciate you coming to my door. I was feeling really bad too. I was a dick. And we talked it out for a second, and it was great. We're like, we both live in these crappy apartments. I'm doing what I can to not let it be an issue. And I was like, yeah, and I'm doing what I can to prevent it from trying to go in your house and that. I'm not trying to make your life harder or kill your baby or anything like that. And it was great. We had a great turnaround. And in that moment of the scuffle, originally, having a little more compassion with that accountability, because I needed both that softness and that hardness. I needed the hardness to not let him just be like, you're being a dick, and blame me for all this stuff when I've done the best that I can. I really have. And when he asked for more, essentially, I wasn't having it. I needed to harden up because I wanted to not overextend myself. I wanted to not give more than I needed to give. Including attitude. But I gave the attitude. And then I apologized for it. And I think that's how we combine two opposite energies. That softness of compassion and the hardness of accountability. I think that's how we begin to combine them, is we bounce back and forth from one to the other, and we try to make each revolution a little faster. Because really, they're like two friends in a friend group that just don't get along very well. They think that they have nothing in common, but everybody else in the group knows that they have a little bit more in common, or maybe a lot more in common than they would like to admit. But the way that they go about things is absolutely polar opposite. And that's the reason they get on each other's nerves. In me, I can honestly say that compassion and accountability have for a long time gotten on each other's nerves within me. My compassionate side and my accountability side have gotten on each other's nerves. And there's something interesting about this opposition of how do we bring these two friends together? How do we get two people who are totally opposite to start to see that maybe they're not so opposite? And if this was a movie, the answer would be a crisis. And since all movies are based on the human experience, I'm going to say that it's going to be a crisis, except we'll down-regulate that a little bit from a crisis to an event, a friction event, an uncomfortable event. It doesn't need to be an actual crisis, but it can be an uncomfortable event. And that's what that that conversation with my neighbor was, that argument with my neighbor was yesterday. That was an uncomfortable event. In a movie, the two people who don't get along and that are out on a spaceship somewhere, it's not until they get invaded by aliens and have to work closely together that they wind up realizing the other's pretty cool. And that's what I'm going to be working on in 2023, is bringing those two friends who think they really aren't friends closer together, making them work together in single events, in single, like, uncomfortable events. And I think that's pretty good. Another piece to this that I find interesting is these oppositions. When I think about oppositions, because of astrology, I think about them geometrically. I think about a natal chart and oppositions in a natal chart and the line going from one to the other, back and forth. And the thing about oppositions in astrology is they always manifest full development of both parties. So if you have something in Virgo and something in Pisces, those are opposite on the natal wheel. The connection that they have as an opposition, no matter what those planets are, if they're in opposition, when you're young especially, you'll bounce back and forth and back and forth and back and forth from one to the other, from one to the other. And as we grow and age and get older and wiser, we maybe don't have to go as far on that pendulum swing in the opposition. We get a little better at not having to be so extreme in one versus the other. We can be accountable while holding some compassion for the people as well. And it's like, and obviously, right? Like, obviously, there's room for accountability and compassion in the same space. Yeah, but that's fucking theoretically. You try to do it. You try to hold accountability and compassion in the same space. That's why parenting is so freaking impossible, is because that's what you have to do. You have to be both compassionate to your children's plight, whatever that may be, whether it's hunger or frustration or their second grade girlfriend dumped them. Like, you have to find both compassion and accountability, and that's so difficult. And I think that's a huge part of why parenting is so difficult. Like I said, we don't have models for it. Maybe you do. Oh, God, I hope you do. I really hope you do. Do you have someone in your life who is really good at being compassionate and holding accountability at the same place and time? Because I don't. I have one or the other. And I have people in my life who can do both, but not in the same space. Not usually. The last thing I want to kind of bring up about this is not a complete thought. This is something that came across my mind a few days ago or last week. And I think about this geometrically as well. And I think that's why it came up in this thought process for me. We're talking about oppositions here, right? We're talking about hardness and softness, compassion and accountability. Well, the opposite of war isn't peace. It's creation. And the opposite of love isn't hate. It's indifference. So that's very interesting to me. Because thinking about these things geometrically, essentially what that does is it gives us a cross, right? These oppositions, if we could view them as like an x-axis and a y-axis, right? So you have your vertical lines and a little cross, and you could slap that in the middle of a circle, and suddenly that looks like two oppositions in a natal chart. But that's just war and peace and love and hate. So I've been trying to think of how do we rectify that the opposite of war isn't peace, it's creation. Okay, that makes sense, because war is about destruction. And peace is peace. It's a lack of destruction. And we need peace for creation. But if the opposite of war isn't peace, it's creation, then why is one of the most famous books of all time called War and Peace? We think of it as opposite, but there's a middle point. And the same is true for love and hate, right? We think that they're opposite, but hate is impossible without love. You can't hate someone or something that either you haven't loved or that hasn't affected something that you love. If you hate something, it's because they injured someone that you love, or because you used to love them and now that love is gone or changed and you hate it. And we know that the worst possible thing that you can do to a child or fermenting rice is indifference. There was that guy who did the water and rice studies where he said nice things to rice, he yelled and screamed at rice, or he totally ignored it. And totally ignoring it was far worse. It molded all crazy. And people are the same. So I've been thinking about these oppositions, and it almost seems like a solution, right? Like the opposite of war isn't peace, it's creation. And creation feels like a solution because when I think of war, it's very yang. It's movement oriented. And peace is stillness. And that makes me think of yin, stillness and contraction. So if we have yang and yin, what's the middle bit? It's really the Tao, right? I mean, that's the yin yang symbol is the symbol that is the Tai Chi symbol. That's the Tao. So is the Tao creation? I don't know. Maybe it is. Creation is one of the single most powerful things on the planet. It's why I do this podcast, is so I can get these thoughts out of my head and out into the world where I'm creating something. Because it takes what's inside me and puts it outside of myself. And that feels good. And like I said, if I get hypo-functioning and I allow myself to hypo-function too long, and I'm just like, I don't want to exert myself, I don't want to yang, so I'm just going to yin, it's really easy for me to slip into a depressive state. And for people who have never had like a major depressive episode, that's not as big of a deal. But for people who have had 3, you're pretty much guaranteed to have a series of depressive episodes throughout your life. That they'll just be there. It'll be a thing that you experience. Maybe not all that often, but you can kind of count on it. And I don't like that depressive space. And maybe this is my yang nature judging peace wrongly, but it seems like peace offers a chance for stagnation in the same way that yin and cold, which is associated with yin, causes contraction and stagnation. And war is just extreme yang. You know, there's exploration, and then there's exploration thinking that you're right and you're the only one that's right, and that's toxic. That causes war. And that's heat in the body. That's what in Chinese medicine would be referred to as heat. So this is really interesting to me. And I just like thinking about things in a way that's kind of not expected, because then I get unexpected answers. And the unexpected answers are much more interesting. So next is the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And that's a solution as well. In the same way that creation is it's a balance of yin and yang, isn't it? It must be. Because you have to have peace. You have to have safety in order to be able to be in that creative space and create anything. But to create anything is yang. So it is a balance of war and peace. It's a balance of yin and yang. It's a balance of soft and hard. And if the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. I mean, that's mindfulness. Well, I guess not mindfulness, but it's out of that Zen Buddhist. Zen teaches unattachment. And I think that fits really well here. With love and hate, and especially talking about children, we talk all the time about attachment theory. Well, I talk all the time about attachment theory, and it's a thing people talk about. And attachment theory is about your perceived love, whether you perceive to be securely loved in a way, because that love is what provides your safety and your security as a baby, because you can't do things for yourself. You can't get a job at 2 years old, pay your own bills. So that love is what fosters your life. And then when that love gets crossed, or those boundaries get crossed some way or another, we can move into hate. And the balancing act in that could be called indifference, or it could be called the principle of non-attachment. That's what Zen calls it. And maybe they're not a perfect analogy. Maybe it's not a perfect metaphor, analogy, whichever. But it seems pretty close. And when you stack non-attachment with creation, my goodness, the freedom. And that is something I have experienced. It's something that I am experiencing now. I was very attached to my book. I'm still attached to my book, but not nearly as attached as I was, because I've written and 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 deleted and deleted and deleted and deleted. And so it's become slightly less precious. I've said in this podcast before that writing a book is for the author. The finished product, the book itself, is for everybody else. And I'm just moving into this place where I've gotten a lot of the big, deep stuff that was almost finished and resolved in me. Writing this book has really been like closing those chapters. And I'm moving to a place where I'll be going back through and crossing all my T's and dotting my I's, and that's the stuff that I'll be working on with the editor. And I'm happy that I'm in this place, because I am much more non-attached to my creation than I was previously. And that freedom is really cool, because I'm able to send it out to people and get feedback without feeling like I'm totally wrong, or I don't deserve this, or I shouldn't be writing a book, or whatever. I'm just like, yeah, I didn't. I'm writing a book. I've written a book. It's hard. It is what it is. But it's indifference and creation. So maybe the term indifference is too strong. It's non-attachment in my case. So I wonder what that balancing factor is between compassion and accountability. Friendship is the first thing that comes to mind, but that doesn't quite fit. What is the halfway point? What is the solution for accountability and compassion in this kind of philosophical, theoretical way that we've explored love and hate, war and peace, creation and indifference? What is that? If I could conceptualize that, this path this year could be a lot easier. But we'll see. So that's my New Year's focus. I want to focus on compassionate accountability. And like I said, there was 2 I'm focusing on, but now that I've really even more explored this, and I explored this a lot, I've been thinking about it all week. I had a 3.5 hour conversation with a friend last night talking about this. And there just always seems to be more to explore. So thanks for exploring this with me. The other final goal of mine is to have less pressure, more peace and less pressure. And I really think that comes down to more compassion and a little less accountability. And that just sounds wrong. I don't like the sound of that. I don't like the sound of that inside myself. And I think that might be left over from these childhood beliefs that I am unreliable, inconsistent, things that I have been. So when I think about not being accountable, that doesn't sit very well with me. So I'm going to have to come up with a new way to phrase that, because language matters. Language matters a lot. Anyway, that's the second goal of mine. The second goal of mine is to just be a little more compassionate with myself, to not push myself as much, and allow myself to experience and do life without the constant striving to improve it the next time. I'm all about self-growth and self-accountability. I'm all about self-improvement. But I might be reaching a place, I think I am reaching a place, where I have focused on my self-improvement so much that if other people haven't focused on it as much as I have, I get frustrated. And that's not good, because we need a community. We need a community of people around us. And if I'm always frustrated at my friends, my family, my community, that community can't serve its purpose in my life, which is to provide me with connection and safety so I can do things like create. So what is your New Year's? What's your resolution? I hope that your resolution, like mine, is focused on a how instead of a what. I want to move through life both holding myself and other people accountable compassionately. That's a how. And I think that's a really good way for people like me to entertain their New Year's resolutions, is think about how instead of a what. Because that focuses us on the journey and not the destination. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. This has been a great episode. I really appreciate you guys listening. If you like the podcast, leave me a rating. I would love that. I would definitely love a 5-star rating. The algorithms on the internet make it to where if you don't have ratings or you don't have enough ratings, you don't wind up getting pulled up in the searches. So if you like what I do, leave me a rating. I really hope that you guys have a marvelous start to your year. Thank you very much for being a part of my community and my family. You're wonderful. And remember, stay curious and stay uncomfortable.